Hello, Silver Fam. We're making heraldry belts. If you're not from the Warband, I'm going to briefly explain what their significance is to us. Basically, anyone who is wearing a green heraldry belt with silver embroidery on field is a Silverglade member or elder. If they have a silver heraldry belt with green embroidery, they are one of the Warband leaders or conclave. The shape themselves tend to come to a point the same way our shields and our banners do. That was a Hayden Jones design. They also match the tassets in our armor as well. We just like to keep it consistent. I didn't film the full size pattern for the flap piece, so I'm doing a small pickup version of this. So basically, you're going to draw a line, which is going to be a fold line. You're going to basically just going to measure the length of what you want that flap to be. Mine is 76 centimeters, which is basically just below my knee. I would go longer than that. And then across the top, it's 18 centimeters, which on the fold is 9 centimeters. And 3/4 of the way down is 26 centimeters or 13 centimeters. And that sort of gives you an indication of how to get that shape, because you can freehand it from there. So that when you open out your pattern piece, you'll have something symmetrical. And that's me just indicating that it needs to be on the fold again, so please do this on the fold. And when you've opened that out, you'll have a really nice pattern piece. And then basically we're gonna cut out our fabric, which you want to do according to the grain line, which is what I'm indicating. So if you see me putting my finger against the raw edge there, and also the selvage edge, they are the grain line. If I pull on the fabric, it won't stretch, whereas if I go across, it will stretch. So when we're cutting out, just make sure you're cutting out following that selvage or raw edge. Either way, don't go across. You're going to cut out a main piece, a lining piece, and 2 cotton drill pieces. You're also going to go into embroidery if you're having embroidery, which I would recommend. This is Hayden just drawing his in marker on the back of his velvet piece. You can do it on the front like I have here. Just make sure you're very confident in your design symmetry. And then I'm doing a chain stitch. So I use the chain stitch more than anything for my heraldry belt pieces. It's just a really nice looking stitch, especially if you're doing it in the silver on the green, you guys. It looks really nice. But it's just a DMC thread from Spotlight or Linkcraft. And that's just a full 6-strand thickness. I then actually go in and do a thinner one, which I pull 3 strands out, so it's half the thickness. And I do a split stitch, and that's the sort of thinner line you'll see in the back of a lot of my filigree work. And then you can see me doing it there. It's basically just a running stitch, and then you're putting the needle back through itself. If you need more help with these 2 stitches, guys, I'd recommend going on YouTube and doing a bit of research on them there, because I'm not very good at the embroidery explanation. I'm still relatively new, but that's essentially what I do for my embroidery work. You're going to take your 3 layers, which is your main piece, your 2 cotton pieces, and your lining piece. And we're going to start constructing those together. So taking your cotton pieces, both of them, because you'll have 2 layers of them, we're going to make some boning channels, because the boning basically stops it from getting caught between your legs. So I do 3, 1 across the largest point, 1 midway, and then 1 a little bit lower from the top, just 1 centimeter wide, making sure you're pinning, because if it's going to slip, it'll be around this point. And just stitch them on. Making sure that you're stopping the boning about 1.5 centimeters from the edge. That's going to stop you breaking needles when you're binding. The boning itself is heavy duty zip ties from Bunnings, and that's me sanding down the edges after I've sort of curved them. It stops it from poking through. There you go. And we're going to layer it, so putting your boning channels on top of the lining piece, and then putting your main piece on top of that. with a 4 stitch length, so the widest stitch length you have, I would just recommend stitching around that and pinning to oblivion, because you're trying to sandwich like 3 pieces together and they will slip. So pinning a lot, guys. You can see me demonstrating that it does not get caught between my legs. And before, when we were cutting out fabric, I showed you the bias. This is actually really important for bias binding, which is how we're going to be finishing the edges today. We're going to do them 4.5 centimeters wide, or 5 if you're not very confident, and just cutting out a bunch of strips across the bias to get that stretch. And then just sewing it on with the 1 centimeter seam allowance we talked about earlier. And then when you get to the point, we do a mitered edge, which is basically pinching and folding that fabric but not stitching over that fold. There are better tutorials for this on YouTube, and just on, like, you can Google better tutorials. I didn't film a lot of this, I'm sorry. But that is called a mitered edge. So then, yeah, just continuing through. And then you're just going to cut out your excess, so about 1/2 centimeter at most. It just helps the binding fold over it. And then this is how I actually finish my binding. You can do it by hand, which is my preference, but just for time's sake, you fold it on itself and then over again, so it's reaching over the stitch line, so that you can see when I put a pin through the seam itself from the front, it actually catches the binding from the back. And then we do a ditch stitch, which is when you stitch through that seam, not either side, through the seam, and it catches it on the back like that. So it's quite neat from the front, and it does the job from the back. So yeah, that's how I do my binding on these things. And then we've done the flat piece, so now we can start the belt. So you're going to take a piece of calico or scrap fabric that you can draw onto. If you have a mannequin, you can use a mannequin. If you've got a human or yourself, you can do it the same way. Just be very careful pinning and marking. And you're just going to sort of pinch excess fabric to create the curve on your body, because you aren't a cylinder. You are a different shape to that. So this is sort of like a entry-level corsetry. This is basically how you would draft a corset pattern, actually. But I start by doing 4 panels when I actually end up doing 3. So you can do 3 to 4. I do not do less than 2. In fact, don't do 2, do 3. I recommend doing 3. The more panels you have, the more curve you're going to be able to achieve without wrinkles. So if you're a curvier shape, you've got a different ratio, like hip to waist, than I do. I like more of one. I would go and do more panels. And then, yeah, just sort of pinching and making sure you've got no excess fabric wrinkling there. I probably could have taken a little bit more out of the side there, as you can see, but that's fine. Mark your center front with a marker. I recommend doing this while you're wearing it or it's on the mannequin, because it will look very similar when it's off the mannequin or off your body. And then drawing your design lines. I make mine a little bit thinner than this by the end, but this is where I started, just drawing that sort of shape, coming up over my hip, and I end up bringing it down a little bit at the back, as you can see there, and then drawing my center back line. Okay, and then you're going to take a different colored marker if you can, and you're going to draw in where the fabric is meeting on those pieces that you've pinched together. That's going to be your stitching line for your panels. So we're going to add seam allowance onto those so that we can stitch them together in your main fabric. And then you can just sort of cut it off. I just cut the excess off while it's on the mannequin, but obviously if you're doing it on a human, just take it off them. Just take it off them. And then, yeah, when you've sort of unpinned it and it's just laying flat, it's going to look something like this. You see why it's important to mark it? So I've written center front, side back, and center back. So if you're happy with the 4 panels, you can just go from here and just add your seam allowance to those side seams. Ta-da! But if you're like me and you actually decided that you want to change how many you've got, I actually break this down to 3 pieces. So instead of cutting along those seam lines, I instead cut along these new design lines. Because while the fabric is still pinched, it's still doing the same job. I just have changed how I want it to sit. So I made some notches so I can see the back from the fronts when it's not got the pattern piece attached to it, and just cutting along them, so that when I am marking out my pattern, it will be 1 piece as opposed to 2 pieces that I've pinned together. So you're going to make a ruled line. Make sure this is very straight. This is going to be your center front fold line, because your center front will be on the fold. And we're just going to dot around. The top and the bottom pieces will not need extra seam allowance added. They are going to be binded. Your side pieces will be. So when you're ruling them in, just keep that in mind, that you're making it very accurate. Not at all like how I've just done at the top there, but so yeah, we just basically mark your notches. That's a waistline that I've done there. You don't have to do that. That's not really necessary in this part. But yeah, add your 1 centimeter seam allowance or 1.5, whatever you're comfortable with. I always do 1 centimeter. And then yep, mark your notch. And then I indicate that the pattern piece already has seam allowance added to the top and the bottom. So future reference, I already know that there's some seam allowance there. And then we're going to mark the pattern, which I write center front. I do a grain line, which is on the fold, as you can see I've indicated here. And then I write the name of the pattern, which is a heraldry belt, and who it's for, so me, and it's pattern piece 1 out of 4. And then I just do that for the other 2 pieces. And yeah, with your center back, make sure that is not on the fold as well. I just thought I'd mention that in case someone thought it might be the same as the front, but that needs to be a separate piece. So don't add seam allowance to the center back, only the sides. We're going to take a piece of calico or cotton on the fold, and put your center front piece along that very accurately, so accurately. And again, following your grain line, as you can see there. That's sort of, if you go against the grain line, you will get wrinkling on your boning channels. That's how that happens. And it's just a bad look, so we don't want that. And we're going to cut out 2 sets of these patterns. So 2 center fronts, there'll be 4 center back pieces in total because it's on the fold, and 4 side pieces because that's on the fold. But only 2 because they were on the fold and they were actually on the fold. So when they're open, there's only 2. Oh, and then I made myself bleed, so make sure you do a blood sacrifice so you get it right, guys. And then we're going to draw in our boning channels. So I do a center front line along that fold line, and then I do 1 centimeter either side of that. So because of the width of my boning, that is what I can do. Just check what size your zip ties are. I assume they're the same. And then I go 5 centimeters from that last line and do another set. And that's on both sides. And then 1.5 centimeters from the top and from the bottom just indicate where you're going to stop your stitching. Because if I know our seam allowance is 1 centimeter, but our boning channels we want to stop a little bit before that because we don't want to break any needles when we're doing our binding. So it's just a little bit of a security. And then this is the center back, so I've left 1 centimeter for seam, 1 centimeter for boning, because the seam will get turned into the boning channel, 1.5 centimeters for eyelets, and then another 1 centimeter boning channel. So you'll have 4 channels all up. 2 are boning, 1 is eyelet, and 1 is seam. And then I put another one right next to the seam on the side as well. Hopefully this makes sense. If you get confused, just watch the whole thing through and then watch it again. You'll get an idea. And then that's then laid out. You're also going to cut out your lining as well, which you can match to the lining on your heraldry belt too. And you only need 1 set of lining, so 1 set of each of these pieces. on the fold. And then again, if you're using a velvet, make sure you're looking at the pile. Can you see the difference in shade there? When I turn the fabric to the other direction, following the green line that I'd cut out originally, you'll see that matches a lot better. And that's just it being upside down. So velvet is the only one that really happens to, so just keep that in mind. And then just cut out your main pieces as well. If you're obviously doing a membership one, just do it in the wool and it's not a problem. And then just pin your boning channels the same we did for the flap, and we're just gonna stitch that all together. And then you'll have your two pieces sort of sandwiched, and that's me indicating what we're doing for the back piece. You should be able to put your boning in at that point. We're going to take the lining, putting it over the top, making that length of the stitch to 4, and we're going to go along the center back, along the top 1 centimeter, and then we're going to go along the center back piece again, but not the bottom, because we need to be able to put the boning in from underneath. And then I'm just cutting out the boning, curving it, sanding it down, making sure there's no sharp edges, and then just putting it in. Okay, and then I'm going to take my main belt fabric, the velvet, and I'm going to put it right sides together against the lining, right side out. And we're going to stitch the 1 centimeter seam along the center back. So bring that stitch length back to 2.5 as you normally would sew. And then just sew along that line. And then when you press it towards the lining piece. And then we're going to do your final boning channels, which we do on top for the center back because it really just sort of strengthens the stress that's going to happen from when you're cinching it with eyelets. So 1 centimeter for the center back, and then it's 1.5 from that line. That's going to be your eyelet channel, which no boning will go into. I've also matched my bobbin thread color to match the top fabric's color, if that makes sense. So I've got silver in the bobbin and I've got green in the top so that I can top stitch and underneath it comes out the right color. And then you go. You've got your boning channel and your eyelet channels. Pop your boning in and we're going to start binding the tops and the bottoms. Same way as we did for the flap actually. So cutting out your 4.5 centimeter wide binding and doing a mitered edge for that center point. 1 centimeter seam allowance basically. We're just gonna cut away the excess, fold in on itself, and then ditch stitch. So same as we did for the other one. And then a close-up of the ditch stitch. And voila! Now we can do some eyelets. I don't really know how else to explain eyelets. Make sure you don't skip the washer if you're doing the metal ones. You can do them by hand, which Hayden did for his, and they look fantastic. So you can definitely do it that way as well. This is just how I did mine. I find it very efficient and I find them very strong. Okay, and then I'm overlocking the top edge of the flap. If you don't have an overlocker, just zigzag stitch on your machine, or you can fold it in on itself and sort of hem it. And then I pin through the seam on my binding on the belt. Make sure that it's even so you don't get a wonky one. And then you just stitch it on. Make sure that you back stitch as well a lot. because this is where it's going to be the most fragile. Like if you're kneeling or you're dead and then you stand up abruptly, you can rip it off. So just make sure you're doing it. And then there you go. You have done a belt and it's done. Wow. Look. Fantastic. Thank you so much for listening.